This is an explanation of my process in developing the Ports of Orion game. Originally, I had the idea that I wanted to see if I could get AI to create a manager game. And I remember from the 80s there was a game called Ports of Call, which I enjoyed quite a lot. So I wanted to see if I could create something that would feel like what I liked about that game back in the days, but in outer space and with a new theme and stories. So this is how the game turned out. There is a star map and you have a fleet that you manage. You can start and stop the time. You have different types of ships where you can refuel and repair. You have a ship market where you can buy new ships. You can follow your economic development. The star map means that you have ships selected and then you can pick different systems and planets and see what contracts are available and assign your ships to various contracts. And then once everything is signed, you start your time and your ships fly around in the universe. And while they fly around, there can be various events and things like that. That is where I got to. I had many other ideas that I wanted to implement, but we'll see if I get to that later at some point. This was an experiment, like a holiday hackathon. I wanted to see if I could get this done, and it was very much to try software development process. I come from a design background, not a development background, so initially I actually have absolutely no idea about development, and everything is what I've learned. I used to do a little bit of HTML and CSS in the early days of the internet, but that's it. Otherwise, I've always been on the interface design part of things. So that's also why it mattered a lot to me if I could get fairly quickly to an interface of the game that I wanted to continue to work with. Previously, worked on designing interfaces for a highly complex level of software, and it matters a lot to me that things are looking good. And if I couldn't get there and then start to develop the content of the game, then I wouldn't be interested at all. And the first things I tried was actually, let's see, here was the prompt. Create an early Macintosh-like design system for a browser-based operating system. Because I had an idea that the management game would be, you sit on some kind of remote planet with a laptop and steer everything from there. So that laptop interface was what I wanted to design. And now I can't exactly remember, because I tried both Claude code and ChatGPT codex for this. One of them created this result, which was, not super nice, but it had a hint of something, but I still pretty far to what I wanted. I also gave Google's anti-gravity a go, and it created this version, which is completely off, but actually lovable. Not gonna explain what lovable is here, but that's like the least complicated way. It's the starter way of doing these vibe coding apps. Everything is contained in one system, and you can actually publish your app. And I must admit that the biggest learning in this was how good Lovable is at doing UX. It actually did this type of layout. I think this is a little bit later in the process where I actually started to, have some demands to the layout and try to adjust different things. You can see here that, I'm working maybe like a tab view, and I wanted this window to be a little bit taller and this window to be a little bit wider. But as soon as I saw, this is an earlier screenshot, everything I have in this document is kind of like what I've picked out from the screenshots on my desktop, because I take screenshots all the time and throw them back at the systems to explain what has happened and what I want to happen. But basically, as soon as I saw what could be done, I instructed the AI to start doing the game. And then everything began. A little bit down the road, I decided that this super early gray thing was a little bit too retro. So I went for something still like early Macintosh, but a little bit more app-like use. where this was the reference, and this is how things turned out. One of the things I worked with a lot was this scroll bar, because I wanted these windows to be moved around, because then you can just build your interface any way you want, and with like scalable screen sizes and things like that, that would give me some freedom. And what I didn't want is like this one right here, where it's inside. You know, I always wanted it like this one, so that all the windows would scale. You can, in this version of the screenshot, it's not visible, but later on I actually create a little handle down there, so you can always make the windows taller, but you can't make them wider. That was to have a little bit of control of the layout, but still, as you have long lists that grow, I wanted to, if you have the screen size, so that people can actually just pull out the list and doesn't have to scroll a lot. One of the things that was quite obvious early to me was that if you are really working with these like pixel perfect things, screenshotting back and forth and trying to explain to the AI what you want isn't very effective. So what I did was create, because I wanted this ship card, and this is the one that actually I think no, I don't have that. That was an earlier version where there was just a little bit of icon, and that was one of the things that I knew from the beginning, that I wanted to have large ship images, because they would, actually you can see it here. Here's the first ship card. There was a small icon right there, and I wanted something more like this, where there was be a larger image of the ship, because I knew that those ship images would help, or would be the stuff that sets the mood in the game. And I also have the rest of the information to look. So what I actually ended up was to design this ship card in Figma, and then export the code into Lovable, and asked it to do. And you can see this is the first result. It threw some stuff around, but I thought when I first saw that, I was like, that didn't work. I wouldn't be able to get the precision I wanted. But it took me 2 or 3 prompts to correct these texts, and then I got to a result. Then it took a little bit longer to actually get these bits of text to line up. They don't really line up yet. You know, this needs to be like 1 pixel higher or something like that. But I decided enough was enough at the time. So that's how it ended. So back to the images and graphics, how I created that. I knew that these still images would be the thing that would set the mood for the game. And I had a kind of like an idea of what I wanted. And obviously I wanted to use AI to create the images. And I also knew that I would need to create a lot of different images that I still didn't know what would be. So I wanted a system that I could use to just create different image assets when I would need them. So the first thing I did was to go to Google Gemini and then start to develop a style. And that's something I've tried before, and it actually works quite well, where you say something like, okay, what is your thoughts? And you need to help me figure this out, and then ask questions to narrow in this. Narrow in on the actual output you want. And I've done this multiple times on my project. It works very nice. So I started with that process again, and it works fine. It asked me a few different questions, and I answered. And what we eventually got was something along the lines of this. And here it's actually asking me if I like one of those 3. But what I thought was that all 3 of them is actually nice for different types of ships. So I went with that look and those different types of ships. And then I knew that, okay, I need to be able to do this in another system like Wee or something different. As you can see here, I'm using like a node-based workflow, and I wanted to create a markdown file so that I can take snippets of this master prompt system that I've just created and use in other things. And that's what I did. And after a few tweaks, like for example, telling it that spaceships don't have wheels, which means that I have to come up with a list of negative prompts as well. Let's go here first. I took it to Wee, and the reason I'm using Wee, for us Scandinavians, that's a hard thing to say, Wee. All right. But the reason I picked this one is that Figma has recently bought Weavy, which means that it's probably a good tool to learn how to use, because Figma is very big in the UX industry, and for creating these automation and prompt workflows, they're probably going to be a big player now that Figma has bought them. But here's the structure of this, and you could do this in any other node-based generative AI maker. But over here I have Nano Banana from Google, and here I have the prompt that Nano Banana is using, but I don't want to copy paste that whole prompt every time. I need to create something new, so I split up the prompt in different sections where I have the master style prompt. I have one thing I noticed, that it would create something that was very beautiful and elaborate to begin with, and with my tiny little images in the game, ship icons and stuff like that, that would kind of disappear. So I found out that I needed another little addition to the prompt to make things more vivid and bold in small sizes. So that's that prompt, small scale compatible. And then the negative, no cars, no wheels and things like that. And then I have the actual prompt for the asset I want to create. And this is the one I changed for each image, each ship, each station, each whatever I want to create. And then once all this is set up, I also had the aspect ratio, because I know that ships was more like a 1:1 ratio, and stations is a more 1:1, and ships are 16:9 widescreen. So I wanted to be able to just change this easily. You can do it other ways. We can do a lot of different things in many different ways, but this is just the way I chose to do this. Then I run the model and I get my ship. And that, of course, I had to do a lot of different times. And to be able to figure out all the things, I had ships, I had stations. Later on, I also had events. I built an asset manager. And back then, Lovable actually had a thing where you could use AI gateways for free, which means that I could generate images with Nano Banana for free. So my first step was, okay, if I'm building an asset manager, can I just quickly build something where I can just use Nano Banana through Lovable to generate the ship images, which turned out to be a little bit more work than I needed, because I already had a flow for it, so it wasn't really necessary. But it was still nice to have this asset manager where I could go in and see all the ships and all the stations. And what I actually ended up using was this base prompt for everything I would generate sooner or later. I used this base prompt in Weavy to actually give me the ship that I want. And for all the assets, I ended up creating a lot of different systems in Weavy. There's something for characters, there's something for ships, there's something for stations, but they pretty much all use the same layout. And you can see here some like unconnected prompts, and those are the individual ones where I would, if I need to use this one, I just drag it over here and it will replace that one, and I can generate. It can probably be done in many different ways. I did try one way, which was fine for all the stations, where I asked AI to write out all the station descriptions, and I put them into an array. So I just had a little selector here instead of this like big bunch of prompts. It's something that can be developed, If I was creating like 200 or 300 assets, I would do it differently, but I realized that it wasn't that many, so spending a lot of time on building a system that would endlessly create me thousands of assets over time was a little bit too much scope creep for what I needed at that point. The next thing, once I had all that down, was to actually make the game fun and playable. And for that, I needed, of course, a economic setup that works, between contracts and the things you have to pay for, like fuel and ship repair and things like that. And also, when I reached this point, I ran out of credits on Lovable, and there was a few days until my credits would reset. And I've been doing local development before. The only thing I was a little bit worried about was, what about the graphics? But since I already had all the graphics defined, it wasn't a problem. So I set up a local development, setup, sandbox, whatever, with Cursor. I usually use Cursor. You can use other things. I'm not married to Cursor or anything like that, but that's what I use. And then inside Cursor, I would use both Claude code, but also OpenAI's ChatGPT Cortex. And then there was just a lot of back and forth. In the process, I found out that there's a company called Machinations, and they have a lot of information about creating these game economic models or economic models altogether, token systems and things like that. And I actually asked their AI to build a model with my ship. There was some other mechanics in play at that time, but I've skipped something since then just to make it easier. Or basically, during the whole process, I've narrowed things down to the MVP level, minimal viable project or product, because I wanted to be able to ship in the time I had, which was the end of the holidays. So if I could see something would cause too much trouble and not be like super important for the main gameplay, I would park it. And that's a whole different discussion, because I had lots of log files in the system. Once I got my local system set up, I created files for project management and backlog, where everything was logged, how far we are. I created epics and user stories and features, the whole Scrum model of working. And I asked the AI to keep track of everything inside Cursor. But that's a little bit more complicated setup, but it's not hard. But I think you need to know how these processes work to actually gain from it. But nevertheless, I had this whole setup where I would describe the economic model in a markdown file. The same goes with all the contracts, mechanics. There would be some variables that each contract could have. I would start with a certain amount of type of contracts, 6 contracts, and the variables, there's a contract, and there's planet, and there's a spaceship, and they all have different stuff they want to do, and things like that. This took quite a while. This, out of the 5-7 days I worked on the project, this was probably 2 days of just working around with this model and the different elements and testing the gameplay to see how it worked. Early on, actually, you couldn't make any kind of money in the game because fuel costs was too high and things like that. So it took a while to dial in, but I used AI both inside of Cursor, but also ChatGPT and Claude to simulate and to try different things. And that's something, this type of work I would never have been able to do without the assistance of AI. It would be way above my pay grade. I don't even know how you would start doing something like this from scratch. You would have to know a lot more about mathematics than I do, that's for sure. Okay, as the game was almost done, all ships was done, all stations was done, the economic model would work, and things like that. The last thing I wanted was an event system, because I wanted some random stuff to happen, and also this is where I put in a little bit of story and some humor. So I started again with having the AI develop some events and create an event system so that I can manage these events. I didn't create any kind of editing in this manager, because I would just edit it in the code. But on this page that I created, I could see all the events, how they would look, and adjust the design. In the beginning, because each event happens to a ship. So I wanted to have the ship card in there while the event is happening, and that I could see within this system, and I could upload the graphics and change the stories. I did that within Cursor, but I could see the finished output here and see the finished output. I could also simulate the results or the consequences of different events with this system, but I didn't use that a lot. The event system doesn't have like a super huge impact on the economics. That's probably one of the things that could be changed for the better later on. But it has a little bit of impact. And again, for creating that system, I created all the different events, put it into my system, and I created all the different event images. The event images took a little bit more of regeneration than the ship and stations, because I wanted to have images that would support specific stories. So there was a little bit more handheld here, but otherwise it turned out fine. The last thing, when everything else was done, was that I needed like a player onboarding thing. And again, that could be done in a very amounts of cool ways. But I needed something that would be fairly easy to do and still have some kind of game flavor to it. So what I decided on was to just record a tutorial, or basically like a window walkthrough of what you would do with Loom. And then I took that video and dropped it into Gemini, asked Gemini to transcribe it. Then I asked Gemini to create like a character that would be this corporate fixer type that would welcome the new manager and show him around his new interface. And then I took that image over to Kling avatar creation, and I dropped in all the transcripts so that this guy actually says everything. And then I took that video and my video from Loom and put it together. There was some bit with the timing that I needed to adjust, so it took me a little while, but it wasn't complicated. But I just needed to adjust the timing from the output of Kling to output of what I was saying here. Again, that could probably be done in very smart ways, but it was fairly easy for me because I know my way around Premiere to just quickly do that manually. And then I had a tutorial so that everybody who starts the game kind of see a walkthrough with this guy is looking like this inside the game. So to wrap things up, what I used was Cursor, Lovable, Weavy, ChatGPT 5.2, Claude Opus 4.1, Claude Code, GPT Codex, Supabase for the database, and Figma and Affinity. I did a lot of taking a screenshot, dropping it into Affinity, and then marking on the screenshot what I wanted to change. Unfortunately, I made a mistake and I deleted that file where I had all these changes, so I can't show you. I used to work in Photoshop, and I still have Photoshop, but I'm trying to see if I can move to Affinity. But this experience here wasn't really making that relationship any better. But that's a story for another time. I used Loom a tiny bit, and also Kling a tiny bit, and as I just told you, Adobe Premiere a tiny bit. All of the stuff that I have just shown you did not happen in a straight flow. It's not like I sat down and this is what I'm going to do. What I've shown you is what I got to work and what worked for me, not all the stuff that I tried that didn't work. I didn't record all that, but there has been a lot of, different pathways and things I tried and, happened, that brought me to the way I solved things. And why create a game when you are a software creator? Then it's one of the things that I've learned in using all these tools is that you really learn how to use them and learn the opportunities and the limitations when you actually have a goal you want to achieve. And a game, especially something like a manager game like this, which is very much like proper software would be out in the real world, but you don't have stakeholders, other systems you would need to integrate with and things like that. You are in a fantasy bubble where you invent everything yourself, which means you can do things faster. That's why I could do this in 7 days. If it was a real software project, then it would just take longer because you have more people to, with opinions and asks and things, and you probably have more systems and other companies that you need to integrate with. But still, I learned a lot in terms of, what can a designer like me or somebody who doesn't know development, I guess you probably have to be a little bit of technically oriented, know your way around different systems to do this. But I also think that it's just trial and error. Especially if you're inventing a game or building a game and that's how you're learning. You can't really break anything but your game. So it's a good sandbox to play in if you want to learn how to create software. And I should probably notice that, I published this game through Lovable to try their platform. That doesn't mean that that's what I would always recommend. There's many different ways. Everything I've done here can be solved in many different ways. It depends very much on your context, the time available, the resources you have available, and what you're trying to build. So that's a little bit of a longer discussion. But if you're in an organization that are curious about these systems, you will have a school where you want to create a program or workshop or where the pupils can experiment with this sort of thing. I'm always open for questions and talks. Just reach out to me at the email you see here on the screen. So that's it for now. I hope you got something from this walkthrough. Thank you.